I woke up that January morning to find 3 HOA workers emptying bags of rock salt into my heated storage shed without my permission. And the moment I confronted them would trigger the most expensive mistake the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association ever made. My name is Paul Henderson, and I bought my house in Maple Ridge, a neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio, 3 years ago. The property came with a detached heated shed that I had spent over $15,000 upgrading with proper insulation, electric heating, climate control, and a new concrete floor with drainage. I used it to store my woodworking equipment and some temperature-sensitive materials. The shed was my pride and joy, something I had poured both money and countless weekends into perfecting. That morning, I was running late for work when I glanced out my kitchen window and spotted an unfamiliar truck backed up to my shed. 2 men were unloading pallets while a third person directed them. I threw on my coat and stormed outside, the bitter cold hitting my face as I crossed my snow-covered yard. "Excuse me, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted as I approached. The woman directing them turned around, and I recognized her immediately. Patricia Morrison, the HOA president. She was in her mid-50s with that particular hairstyle that screamed management speak to me, and frosted blonde highlights that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. "Oh, Paul, good morning," she said with false cheerfulness. "We are just utilizing your shed for community snow removal supplies. The HOA storage unit is completely full." "Utilizing my shed," I repeated, my voice rising. "This is my private property. You cannot just walk in here and start using my building." Patricia's smile tightened. "Actually, according to the HOA bylaws, Section 12.4, the association has the right to use private amenities for community purposes in emergency situations. We have a major winter storm forecast, and we need somewhere to store the salt and sand. That section is about using private roads for emergency vehicle access," I said, having actually read the entire HOA covenant when I bought the house. "It says nothing about commandeering someone's personal storage building." One of the workers, a younger guy with a beard, looked uncomfortable and stopped unloading. The other worker, an older man with a weathered face, just kept moving bags of salt. "Paul, do not make this difficult," Patricia said, her tone shifting from fake friendly to condescending. "We are doing this for the community. Your shed is heated, which means the salt will not clump, making it much easier for our snow removal teams to work efficiently. This benefits everyone, including you. I do not care if it benefits everyone. It is my shed, I pay for the heating, and you did not ask my permission." I pulled out my phone. "You have exactly 5 minutes to remove everything you have put in there, or I am calling the police for trespassing." Patricia's face flushed red. "You would not dare. Think about your standing in this community. Try me." She stared at me for a long moment, clearly not used to being challenged. Finally, she turned to the workers. "Gentlemen, please continue. Mr. Henderson is just being dramatic." I dialed 911 right there in front of her. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Officer Martinez, a patient-looking man in his 40s, listened to both sides of the story while his partner, Officer Chen, examined the shed and took notes. "Madam, do you have any written permission from the property owner to use this structure?" Martinez asked Patricia. "I have the HOA bylaws right here," she said, pulling out a printed document from her enormous purse. Section 12.4 clearly states that during emergencies, the association can utilize private resources for community benefit. Martinez read through it carefully. "Madam, this section specifically references roadways and access routes for emergency vehicles. It does not mention private structures or buildings. But the spirit of the law, Patricia started. The spirit does not matter in a civil dispute, Martinez interrupted politely but firmly. What matters is what is written. Sir, is this your property? Yes, officer. I have the deed right in my house if you need to see it. That will not be necessary. Madam, you and your workers need to remove everything you have placed in this gentleman's shed. If you refuse, he has grounds to press trespassing and theft of services charges. Patricia's face went from red to purple. This is absolutely ridiculous. I am the HOA president. I am trying to help this community prepare for a major storm. Then I suggest you find a legal place to store your materials, Officer Chen said. You have 2 hours to clear this property. After the police left, Patricia walked up to me, her eyes narrowed. You have made a very big mistake, Paul. You just made an enemy of the entire HOA board. No, Patricia, you made the mistake when you thought you could just take what is not yours. She spun on her heel and marched to her Mercedes SUV, barking orders at the confused workers to start removing the salt bags. It took them over an hour to clear everything out. I stayed and watched the entire time, making sure they did not damage anything. When they finally finished, I inspected the shed thoroughly. They had already opened several bags of salt, and there were spills on my concrete floor. The salt residue would need to be cleaned up properly to prevent corrosion of my tools and equipment. I spent the rest of that day documenting everything. I took photos of the salt residue, checked my security camera footage, which clearly showed Patricia and her crew entering my property without permission, and started a detailed log of events. Something told me this was far from over. I was right. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a violation notice claiming that my shed was not in compliance with community standards. According to the letter, the structure exceeded the allowable square footage for accessory buildings, was not properly registered with the HOA Architectural Review Committee, and the external color did not match the approved palette. I read the letter 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. The shed had been there when I bought the house. The previous owner had built it, and it had passed all the HOA inspections at the time of my purchase. Now, suddenly, it was a problem. The fine was $500, with an additional $100 per week, until the violations were corrected. I called an emergency meeting with the HOA board, which was my right as a homeowner. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community center. When I arrived, Patricia was already there, sitting at the head of a long table with 4 other board members. I recognized them all from neighborhood events. There was Donald Chen, the treasurer, a nervous-looking accountant in his 60s. Margaret Stevens, the secretary, a stern woman who always wore pearls. Robert Fisher, a retired military officer who served as the compliance officer. And finally, there was Susan, the newest board member whose last name I could not remember. Mr. Henderson, thank you for coming, Patricia said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Please have a seat. I remained standing. I am here about this ridiculous violation notice. The shed has been on my property for 8 years. It was approved by the previous architectural committee. Nothing has changed about it. Actually, we have conducted a thorough review of all property files, Margaret said, adjusting her glasses. And we have discovered that the original building permit for your shed was approved based on incorrect dimensions. The structure is actually 300 square feet, which exceeds the 250 square foot maximum for accessory buildings. Then the error was made by the previous HOA board, not by me or the previous owner. I should not be penalized for their mistake. The HOA covenants are clear, Robert said in his clipped military tone. All structures must comply with current regulations regardless of when they were built. So what exactly are you expecting me to do? Tear down a perfectly good shed because someone 8 years ago wrote down the wrong number? You have several options, Patricia said, pulling out another document. You can apply for a variance, though I must warn you that the board rarely approves variances for oversized structures. You can modify the shed to bring it within compliance, reducing its square footage, or you can remove it entirely. This is retaliation, I said flatly. This is because I would not let you use my property without permission. That is a very serious accusation, Patricia said, her voice ice cold. We are simply enforcing the rules that apply to all homeowners equally. Then show me one other property in this neighborhood that has been cited for a similar violation. Silence filled the room. I thought so, I continued. This is targeted harassment and I will be contacting a lawyer. I walked out before they could respond. The next day, I called 3 different attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes. The first 2 were too expensive, charging retainer fees I could not comfortably afford. The third, however, was a younger lawyer named David Kim, who had recently started his own practice after working for a large firm that handled HOA cases. Mr. Henderson, I will be straight with you, David said during our initial consultation at his small office in downtown Columbus. HOA cases are tricky. They have a lot of power under Ohio law, and judges tend to defer to their authority unless you can prove clear abuse or selective enforcement. I have proof, I said, showing him the timeline of events, my security footage, and the violation notice. David watched the footage carefully, then read through all the documents I had brought. After about 30 minutes, he looked up at me with a slight smile. This is actually pretty blatant. The timing alone suggests retaliation, and if we can show that they have not enforced this particular regulation against other homeowners, we have a case. My fee is $200 an hour, but I think we can resolve this with a few strongly worded letters before it goes to court. What if they do not back down? Then we sue them for selective enforcement and harassment. But honestly, most HOA boards fold once they realize they might have to pay legal fees and potentially damages. I hired him on the spot. David sent a letter to the HOA within 3 days. It was beautifully crafted, laying out the timeline of events, citing relevant Ohio case law on selective enforcement and retaliatory actions by HOAs, and demanding that they withdraw the violation notice and reimburse me for my legal fees. Patricia's response came a week later. Not only did she refuse to withdraw the violation, but she also sent me an additional notice. This one claimed that my security cameras, which faced my own property, and the shed violated community privacy standards because they might incidentally capture footage of the sidewalk, which was considered common area. The fine for that was another $300. They are doubling down, David said when I showed him the new notice. This is actually good for us. The more unreasonable they get, the stronger our case becomes. But it was not good for my stress levels or my bank account. Between David's fees and the mounting HOA fines, which they claimed they would place a lien on my house for if I did not pay, I was looking at thousands of dollars in costs. Then something unexpected happened. I was at my local hardware store, Becker's Hardware on Main Street, picking up supplies to properly clean the salt damage from my shed floor. While I was checking out, the owner, Jim Becker, an older man who had run the store for 30 years, struck up a conversation. "Heard you are having trouble with the Maple Ridge HOA," he said. "Word traveled fast in our community." "Yeah, something like that. Patricia Morrison," he asked, and when I nodded, he shook his head. That woman has been a thorn in a lot of people's sides. You know, she tried to find my brother when he lived in that neighborhood because his grass was half an inch too tall. Half an inch. He measured it himself. That sounds about right. Listen, I should not tell you this, but I figure you ought to know. The HOA bought about 3 tons of rock salt from me back in December. I delivered it myself to their storage unit. When Patricia came in a few weeks ago to buy more, she mentioned they had run out of space and needed to find somewhere to store it temporarily. My mind started racing. Did she mention where? She asked if I knew anyone with a heated storage space they could rent short-term. I told her I did not, but she seemed pretty insistent that it had to be heated. This confirmed what I already suspected. Patricia had not stumbled upon my shed as a convenient emergency solution. She had specifically targeted it because it had exactly what she needed. Jim, would you be willing to write down what you just told me and sign it? He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure. Patricia Morrison does not scare me. I do not live in her neighborhood. Jim wrote out a brief statement right there, and I texted a photo of it to David immediately. That evening, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I drove through Maple Ridge, looking at other properties. What I found was illuminating. There were at least 6 other properties with sheds that looked as large as or larger than mine. I documented each one with photos, addresses, and measurements estimated from public property records I looked up on my phone. One shed, belonging to a property on Birch Street, was clearly oversized. But the property owner was Richard Martinez, who I discovered was Patricia's brother-in-law. The next week, David and I met again to prepare our formal response and potential lawsuit. This is even better than I thought, David said, reviewing all my new evidence. You have documented selective enforcement, you have a witness statement showing premeditation, and you have security footage of the actual trespass. Plus, the timing of these violations immediately following your refusal to allow them access is textbook retaliation. So what is our next move? We file suit in Franklin County Court. We are going to sue the HOA, Patricia Morrison personally in her capacity as HOA president, and the other board members for selective enforcement, harassment, and trespass. We are also going to demand that they cease all violation notices against you and that they pay your legal fees and damages for your time and stress. How long will this take? Could be anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending on how much they fight it. But before we could file the lawsuit, something happened that changed everything. The major winter storm that Patricia had been preparing for finally hit Columbus in early February. It was a massive system that dumped 18 inches of snow over 2 days and created widespread chaos. Schools closed, businesses shut down, and the roads became treacherous. The HOA snow removal crews were out in force, trying to keep the neighborhood streets passable. I watched from my window as they worked, and I had to admit they were doing a decent job with the main roads. Then, on the second night of the storm, my phone rang at 11:30. It was a number I did not recognize. Hello, Mr. Henderson, this is Tom Brewster. I am the night supervisor for the snow removal crew in your neighborhood. Okay, what can I do for you? Look, I am going to be straight with you. We are completely out of salt. The HOA storage unit is empty and we cannot get any more delivered until the roads clear. But I know that a couple weeks ago we stored salt in your shed before, you know, the situation. I was wondering if there is any way we could access it again. I would pay you myself if I had to. People cannot get out of their driveways, and we have a couple of elderly residents who need to get to medical appointments tomorrow. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to tell him no, to let Patricia deal with the consequences of her own actions. But this was not about Patricia. This was about my neighbors who needed help. Tom, the shed is empty. The HOA removed all the salt after I called the police. There's nothing here. Damn, he said quietly. All right, I had to try. Thanks anyway. Wait, I said, an idea forming. How much salt do you need? At least a ton to get through tomorrow and make it to the next delivery. If I could get you salt, would the HOA be willing to rent my shed properly? With a contract, fair payment, and covering the utility costs. There was a pause. I cannot speak for the HOA board, but that would be worth bringing up. Right now, we are kind of desperate. Give me 10 minutes. I called Jim Becker at home, apologizing for the late hour. He was already awake, watching the storm coverage on the news. Jim, do you have any salt left in stock? About half a ton. Why? I will buy it all. Can you deliver it to my house tonight, in this weather? Paul, I do not know. I will pay double your normal price plus a $300 delivery fee. Jim was quiet for a moment. Give me an hour. I called Tom back and told him I could have salt available within 2 hours if the HOA was willing to rent my shed properly. He said he would make some calls. 45 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Donald Chen, the HOA treasurer. Mr. Henderson, Tom Brewster contacted me about your offer. What exactly are your terms? Simple. The HOA rents my shed for the remainder of winter at fair market rate. I looked it up, and climate-controlled storage in Columbus runs about $1.50 per square foot per month. My shed is 300 square feet, so that is $450 per month. You also cover the increased utility costs from the heating, which I estimate will be about an extra $100 per month. And you sign a formal rental agreement that specifies you are responsible for any damages, and that you will clean the space thoroughly when you are done. That is over $500 per month, Donald said. That is the fair market rate for what you are getting. Take it or leave it. And Donald, this deal is only available right now during this emergency. Once this storm passes and you are not desperate anymore, the price goes up to include damages for all the harassment I have endured. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Then, I heard muffled voices as he apparently covered the phone to talk to someone else. All right, he finally said, but I need board approval to sign a contract. Then get it. You have until Jim Becker arrives with the salt. After that, the offer expires. You are not giving us much choice. No, I am not. Just like your board did not give me much choice when you started hitting me with bogus violations. Donald hung up without saying goodbye. True to his word, Jim Becker arrived about an hour and 20 minutes after our call. He had loaded his personal pickup truck with bags of salt, making multiple trips from his store. His son was with him, helping with the delivery. Jim, you are a lifesaver, I said as they started unloading. Just promise me that if this goes bad, you will not mention where you got the salt, he said with a grin. I still have to do business with the HOA. Your secret is safe with me. We were about halfway through unloading when Donald Chen pulled up in his Lexus, struggling to navigate the snowy driveway. He got out, wearing a heavy coat and looking exhausted. I have board approval, he said, holding up his phone to show me an email chain. Patricia is furious, but Robert and Margaret agreed that we need the storage space, and this is cheaper than the lawsuit you are threatening. Smart decision. I will have our lawyer draft a contract tomorrow. No, we do this now. I have a standard rental agreement form on my computer. We fill it out, both sign it, and I will get it notarized tomorrow. Until then, we both initial every page tonight so neither of us can claim the other changed anything. Donald looked like he wanted to argue but just nodded tiredly. Fine. We went inside, and I pulled up a basic commercial rental agreement template I found online. We customized it with the specific terms we had discussed, including the monthly rate, utility reimbursement, damage responsibility, and a clause that the HOA would immediately withdraw all violation notices against me. It took us nearly an hour to get everything written up to both our satisfaction. Jim and his son finished unloading the salt and left with my payment, which included a generous tip on top of what I had promised. Finally, Donald and I both signed and initialed every page of the agreement. "This does not mean we are friends," Donald said as he was leaving. "I never expected us to be." The next morning, I took the rental agreement to a notary public at the bank. Then I made several copies, keeping one for myself, mailing one to David Kim, and delivering one personally to Donald at his house. Over the next few days, the storm cleared, and life in Maple Ridge slowly returned to normal. The HOA snow removal crews had access to my shed, and the salt stored there, and the neighborhood streets were kept clear. But Patricia Morrison was not done with me. A week after the storm, I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that the rental agreement I had signed with Donald was not valid because it had not been properly approved at an official board meeting. Only Donald and 2 other board members had approved it via email, which apparently violated their bylaws requiring a quorum of 4 board members to vote on expenditures over $200 per month. Therefore, according to Patricia's letter, I was now storing HOA property without authorization and needed to allow them 24/7 access to my shed, or they would sue me for theft. I showed the letter to David, who actually laughed. "Oh, this is perfect," he said. "They are making our case for us. They are essentially admitting that they are using your property without a valid agreement, which means they are trespassing, and you can demand immediate removal of their materials. But I signed an agreement with Donald, which they are now saying is not valid. So either they honor the agreement and you have a contract, or they do not honor it and they are trespassing. They cannot have it both ways. So what do? We call their bluff. You send a letter, drafted by me, informing them that if they do not honor the rental agreement, they have 24 hours to remove all materials from your property. If they refuse, we file for an emergency injunction and sue for trespass and storage fees at a much higher rate." The letter went out that afternoon via email and certified mail. It was firm, professional, and gave them exactly one option: honor the agreement or remove their salt immediately. Patricia tried to call me that evening. I did not answer. She left a voicemail that was barely coherent, something about me being unreasonable and hurting the community, and how she would make sure I regretted this. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to David. The next morning, I got a call from Margaret Stevens, the HOA secretary. "Mr. Henderson, I am calling to inform you that the board held an emergency meeting last night. We have voted 4-1 to ratify the rental agreement that Donald negotiated with you. What about the letter Patricia sent saying it was not valid?" That letter was sent without board approval. Patricia acted unilaterally, which she does not have the authority to do. The board has also voted to censure her for sending unauthorized communications on behalf of the HOA. This was interesting. Who voted against ratifying the agreement? I cannot disclose individual board member votes. Let me guess, Patricia. Margaret was silent for a moment. The rental agreement is now in full effect. You will receive payment for the first month by the end of this week, along with reimbursement for your estimated utility costs. We will need you to provide actual utility bills so we can calculate the precise amount going forward. And the violation notices about my shed, those have been withdrawn. You will receive written confirmation by end of day today. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling something I had not felt in weeks. Relief. Maybe this was finally over. It was not over. 2 days later, I came home from work to find that someone had spray-painted the word "selfish" across the door of my shed in bright red paint. I called the police immediately. Officer Martinez responded again, along with a different partner this time, Officer Williams. They documented the vandalism, took photos, and asked if I had any security camera footage. I did. My cameras covered the shed area, and the footage clearly showed a figure approaching around 2 in the afternoon, spray painting the door, and then leaving quickly. The person was wearing dark clothes and a hood, and their face was not visible, but they had arrived and left in a vehicle that my driveway camera caught. The license plate was partially visible in one frame. "We will run this and see what we find," Officer Martinez said. "This is clearly vandalism, and if we can identify the person, they will be charged." "Thank you." It took the police 3 days to trace the license plate. When Officer Martinez called me with the results, his voice was careful and professional. "Mr. Henderson, we have identified the vehicle. It is registered to a Janet Morrison. Does that name mean anything to you, Morrison? Is she related to Patricia Morrison?" According to our records, Janet Morrison is Patricia Morrison's daughter. She is 24 years old and lives at the same address as Patricia. "We are going to bring her in for questioning." The next day, Janet Morrison was charged with criminal mischief and vandalism. Because the damage was estimated at over $400 to properly remove the paint and refinish the door, it was a second-degree misdemeanor, which carried potential jail time and fines. But the bigger problem for Patricia was that several neighbors had seen Janet's car at Patricia's house immediately before and after the vandalism. When the police questioned Janet, she apparently broke down and admitted that her mother had asked her to do it, saying it was just a prank and that I deserved it for being difficult. Patricia was then charged as an accessory to vandalism. The story spread through Maple Ridge like wildfire. Within a week, there was a petition circulating to recall Patricia from the HOA board. It required signatures from 20% of homeowners to trigger a recall election, and it reached that threshold in 5 days. I did not sign the petition myself. I did not need to. Plenty of other people were happy to do it. The recall election was scheduled for the first week of March. In the meantime, Patricia was placed on administrative leave from her position as HOA president, and Robert Fisher assumed temporary leadership. Robert called me a few days after taking over. "Mr. Henderson, I want to apologize on behalf of the board. What happened to you was wrong. Patricia allowed her personal feelings to compromise her judgment and the integrity of this organization. I appreciate that. I also want to assure you that the rental agreement will be honored in full. You have been a model homeowner, and you deserved better treatment than you received." "Thank you, Robert. There is one more thing. Several board members and I have discussed this, and we would like to offer you additional compensation for the harassment you endured and the damage to your property. We are prepared to offer $3,000, along with covering the cost of repairing your shed door, if you would be willing to sign a mutual release agreement." A release agreement saying I would not sue the HOA, correct? I thought about it. David and I had been preparing to file suit for selective enforcement and harassment. We had a strong case, but lawsuits were time-consuming, expensive, and stressful. $3,000, plus the repair costs, plus the ongoing rental income, plus having all the violations withdrawn was actually a pretty good outcome. Let me talk to my attorney. David's advice was practical. Take it. You have already won. They are paying you rent. Your violations are gone. Patricia is being recalled, and now they are offering you money to make this go away. You could sue and maybe get more, but it will cost you months of your life and more money in legal fees. Sometimes the smart move is to take the win and move on." I agreed. The settlement was finalized within a week. The HOA paid for a professional to restore my shed door, which actually looked better than before after the work was done. They also paid me the $3,000, plus the first month's rent and utility reimbursement. The recall election happened in early March. Patricia was removed from the board by a vote of 73% of participating homeowners. It was one of the largest turnouts for an HOA election in Maple Ridge history, but the story was not quite finished. In mid-March, I received a subpoena to appear as a witness in the criminal case against Patricia and Janet Morrison. Both had pleaded not guilty to the vandalism charges, and the case was going to trial. The trial was scheduled for late April at the Franklin County Municipal Court. It was a relatively minor case in the grand scheme of the justice system, but for me and for Patricia, it felt significant. I arrived at the courthouse on a rainy Tuesday morning, wearing my best suit. David came with me for moral support, even though I had my own legal representation for this, provided by the prosecutor's office. The courtroom was small and sparsely attended. Patricia and Janet sat at the defense table with their attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s named Ellen Rodriguez. Patricia would not look at me, but Janet kept glancing over nervously. The prosecutor was a young assistant district attorney named Ryan Walsh. He had contacted me several times before the trial to prepare my testimony. The trial itself was fairly straightforward. Ryan presented the evidence: the security camera footage showing Janet's vehicle, the spray paint found in Patricia's garage that matched the paint used on my shed, and testimony from neighbors who had seen Janet's car. Then I took the stand. Ryan walked me through the timeline of events, starting with the initial incident where the HOA tried to use my shed without permission, through the various violation notices, and culminating in the vandalism. "Mr. Henderson, in your opinion, what was the motive for this vandalism?" Ryan asked. "Objection. Calls for speculation," Ellen Rodriguez said immediately. "Sustained," the judge said. Ryan rephrased. "Mr. Henderson, had you had any disputes with the Morrison family prior to this incident?" "Yes. I had been in an ongoing dispute with Patricia Morrison in her capacity as HOA president. She had attempted to use my property without permission, and when I refused, the HOA began issuing violation notices that I believed were retaliatory." "And how did that dispute resolve?" "The HOA board eventually withdrew the violations and agreed to rent my shed for legitimate storage purposes. Patricia was censured by the board for her actions, and she was later recalled from her position." The defense tried to poke holes in my testimony, suggesting that I could not definitively prove the car in the footage belonged to Janet, and that the whole thing might have been done by someone else trying to frame them. But the evidence was pretty solid, and my testimony was consistent. The most dramatic moment came when Janet took the stand in her own defense. She was clearly uncomfortable and kept looking to her mother for reassurance. Ellen Rodriguez walked her through a carefully prepared statement claiming that she had been at home the entire afternoon of the vandalism, and that someone must have borrowed or stolen her car without her knowledge. But when Ryan cross-examined her, she fell apart. "Miss Morrison, you stated that you were home all afternoon on the day in question. Can anyone corroborate that? My mother was there." "So your mother, who is the co-defendant in this case, is your only alibi?" "Yes." "Did you file a police report about your car being stolen or used without your permission?" "No, I did not realize it until later." When did you realize it? When the police came to talk to me. So several days later, you suddenly realized that someone had taken your car, committed a crime, and returned it, and you never noticed. Janet hesitated. I guess when you put it that way, it sounds bad. Miss Morrison, did your mother ask you to vandalize Mr. Henderson's shed? Objection. Ellen Rodriguez jumped up. Attorney is badgering the witness. Overruled, the judge said. The witness will answer the question. Janet looked at her mother, then at the judge, then down at her hands. I do not want to answer that. You do not have a right to remain silent when you have taken the stand in your own defense, the judge said. Answer the question. Tears started running down Janet's face. She did not ask me to vandalize it. She just said that maybe someone should teach him a lesson about being part of a community. She said he was selfish and hurting the neighborhood. I thought I was helping. The courtroom went silent. Patricia closed her eyes. The trial concluded later that afternoon. The judge took less than an hour to deliberate before returning with a verdict. Janet Morrison was found guilty of criminal mischief and vandalism. Patricia Morrison was found guilty of conspiracy to commit vandalism and being an accessory to the crime. Janet was sentenced to 30 days in jail, suspended, with 2 years of probation and 100 hours of community service. She also had to pay restitution for the damage, which the court calculated at $850 based on the actual repair costs. Patricia received a harsher sentence, 90 days in jail, suspended with 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a $5,000 fine. The judge also ordered her to pay half of the restitution along with her daughter. Miss Morrison, Mrs. Morrison, the judge said before dismissing them, I want to be clear about something. This case is about more than property damage. It is about abuse of authority, retaliation, and a fundamental failure to understand that being in a position of power in a community organization does not give you the right to harass people who disagree with you. I hope you both use this probation period to reflect on your actions and make better choices in the future. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was glad it was over, glad that justice had been served, but also sad that it had come to this. Patricia had let her ego and her need for control destroy her reputation and her relationship with her daughter, but I also felt something else, vindication. I had stood up for myself when it would have been easier to just go along. I had refused to be bullied, and in the end, I had prevailed. The HOA continued to rent my shed through the rest of that winter and into early spring. They paid on time every month, and the arrangement worked well. When winter ended and they no longer needed to store road salt, Robert contacted me to ask if they could continue renting the space for other community supplies. What kind of supplies? I asked. Equipment for neighborhood events, spare tools for common area maintenance, that sort of thing. We have realized that having climate-controlled storage is actually very useful, and the price you are charging is fair. Sure, I am happy to continue the arrangement. Great. We would like to extend the contract for a full year if that works for you. We signed a new contract for annual rental at the same monthly rate. Over the course of a year, I would make over $6,000 from renting out a space that had previously just been costing me money in heating and maintenance. But more than the money, I had gained something else: respect from my neighbors and the knowledge that I had stood up for what was right. In the months that followed, the HOA board underwent significant changes. A new president was elected, a woman named Sarah Sullivan, who was thoughtful, collaborative, and actually listened to homeowners. She reached out to me personally to apologize for what had happened and to assure me that the new board was committed to fair and transparent governance. We learned a lot from the situation with Patricia. Sarah told me over coffee at a local cafe. It exposed some serious flaws in how our board operated. We have since revised our bylaws to include better checks and balances, a formal appeals process for violations, and requirements for transparency in board decisions. That sounds like positive change. It is. And honestly, Paul, your willingness to stand up to the board when they were wrong was a wake-up call for a lot of people. Sometimes organizations need someone to hold them accountable. I appreciated her perspective. As summer arrived, I found myself actually enjoying living in Maple Ridge again. The stress and conflict of the previous months faded, replaced by normal neighborhood life. I attended community barbecues, helped out at a neighborhood cleanup day, and even joined a committee to plan improvements to the community playground. One evening in June, I was working in my shed, organizing some of my woodworking tools when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find Donald Chen standing there, looking awkward. "Donald, what can I do for you?" I wanted to apologize, he said simply. I should have stood up to Patricia sooner. I knew what she was doing to you was wrong, but I went along with it because it was easier than confronting her. I am sorry. I had not expected this. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. I also wanted you to know that I have resigned from the HOA board. I have been treasurer for 6 years, and I think it is time for someone else to take over, someone with more courage than I had. Donald, you did the right thing in the end. You approved the rental agreement when it mattered. Only because we were desperate. I should have stopped the harassment from the beginning. He looked around at the shed, at the neatly organized space. You did a nice job with this place. I can see why you fought so hard to protect it. After he left, I stood in the doorway of my shed, looking out at the neighborhood. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light across the houses and lawns. I could hear children playing in the distance, the sound of someone mowing their grass, the normal sounds of suburban life. I thought about everything that had happened over the past 6 months. The stress, the conflict, the legal battles, and finally, the resolution. It had been exhausting and expensive, but I had learned something important. Standing up for yourself matters, even when it is hard, even when it costs you something. The shed behind me was not just a building anymore. It was a symbol of my willingness to defend what was mine, to refuse to be pushed around, and to demand that even powerful institutions like an HOA follow the rules and treat people fairly. That summer, I got a call from a reporter at the Columbus Dispatch. Someone had tipped her off about the story of my fight with the HOA, and she wanted to write an article about it. I was hesitant at first, but David encouraged me to do it. Your story could help other people who are dealing with HOA problems. It shows that you can fight back and win. The article ran in late July under the headline, "Homeowner turns tables on HOA, now collects rent for storage space they tried to take." It was a fair and accurate account of what had happened, and it included interviews with several of my neighbors, with Robert Fisher from the HOA board, and even a brief quote from Patricia's attorney saying her client declined to comment. After the article came out, I received several emails and phone calls from other homeowners around Ohio who were dealing with their own HOA disputes. I tried to help where I could, mostly by sharing David's contact information and encouraging them to document everything and know their rights. One call particularly stood out. It was from a man named George Patterson who lived in a neighborhood in Cleveland. His HOA was trying to force him to remove solar panels from his roof, claiming they were not aesthetically pleasing. "I read about what you went through," George said, "and it gave me hope that I can fight this. These solar panels save me hundreds of dollars a year on electricity, and they are completely legal under Ohio law. The HOA has no right to make me remove them. Then do not let them, I said. Get a good lawyer, document everything, and do not back down if you are in the right. That is what I needed to hear. Thank you. As fall arrived and another winter approached, the HOA contacted me about renewing the rental agreement for my shed. This time, they wanted to lock in a 2-year contract, which would give them stable storage costs and give me guaranteed income. I agreed, and we signed the new contract in October. When the first snow fell in November, I watched from my window as the HOA trucks came and went from my property, loading up with salt to treat the neighborhood roads. The arrangement that had started as a conflict had turned into a mutually beneficial partnership. Patricia Morrison moved out of Maple Ridge that fall. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had bought a condo in a building with no HOA. The irony was not lost on anyone. Janet completed her community service and stayed out of trouble as far as I knew. I actually ran into her once at a grocery store in December. She looked like she wanted to say something to me, but instead just gave a small nod and kept walking. I nodded back. There was nothing else that needed to be said. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. What had started as a simple refusal to allow unauthorized use of my property had snowballed into a legal battle, criminal charges, and ultimately, significant changes in how the Maple Ridge HOA operated. The shed continued to generate rental income month after month. By the end of that second year, I had collected over $12,000 in rent and utility reimbursements. That was almost enough to completely recoup my initial investment in upgrading the building, and going forward, it would be pure profit. But the real victory was not financial. It was knowing that I had stood up for myself, held an institution accountable, and helped create positive change in my community. The new HOA board was transparent, fair, and actually worked to serve homeowners rather than control them. On a cold evening in January, exactly 2 years after this whole saga began, I stood in my heated shed, warm and comfortable while snow fell outside. The space was neatly organized, with half of it dedicated to my woodworking equipment and the other half filled with HOA supplies and road salt. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was the monthly rent payment from the HOA, deposited automatically into my account like clockwork. I smiled to myself. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is turning a bad situation into an opportunity, standing firm on principle, and coming out ahead in the end. The shed door was still there, restored and repainted, with no trace of the vandalism that had once marked it. Just like my relationship with the HOA had been restored and rebuilt into something functional and fair. I turned off the lights, locked up the shed, and walked back to my house through the gently falling snow. Tomorrow I would go to work, come home, maybe do some woodworking in the evening. Normal life, the kind I had fought so hard to protect. And every month, like clockwork, the HOA would continue paying me rent for the space they once tried to take without asking. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was mine, and it had been worth fighting for.